Hi, this is Mark Hooper with Lodestone. We're going to work in Adobe Photoshop, and I want to show you how to make color corrections to your photos, and also I want to share a technique that I was playing around with for enhancing edges of certain areas of a photograph. So the things we're going to cover in this demo include, I want to show you how to determine neutral gray for a photo and use that area to be able to make your color correction. Also, we're going to adjust settings in your curve panel for best results without losing details in the white and black areas of the photo. Then we're going to use the curve adjustment layer to enhance the exposure of midtones in a certain photograph. And then in that same photograph, I want to show you how to use the Find Edges filter. We're also going to use the linear burn blend mode and a mask to bring out edge details in a photo. So let's get started. Alright, so I have Adobe Photoshop CS6 open, and I'm going to show you some techniques that are actually techniques you'll be able to use in even previous versions of Photoshop. So I have a photograph here of a garden scene where a bicycle with some wildflowers in a basket, and looks pretty nice, but actually I could make it better. And I want to show you a technique that I learned a while back to be able to go in and make really nice corrections, auto corrections, using the curves panel. The first thing though that I want to do is with this color photograph, the best way for me to identify an area to sample off of to make the correction would be to find an area in the photo that I would know would be, if this were grayscale, a 50% gray area. So let me show you a way that you can identify an area to sample off of to make your correction. I'm going to start off here by making a duplicate of the layer that I'm currently working in. So let me just duplicate this layer. Even though I'm going to be using adjustment layers, it's still a good practice to make a copy of the layer that you're working on. So I'm just going to rename this layer my photo. Now I'm going to add another layer, and I'm just going to be using this layer and the adjustment layer I'm going to be creating here in just a moment temporarily. But with this layer, I'm going to choose to fill it with 50% gray. So I'm going to choose Edit, Fill, and then in the Contents area, I'm going to use 50% gray. And click OK. Totally covers up my photo. You're probably wondering, how in the world is he going to use this to make a color correction to the layer below? Well, let me show you. I'm going to come over and adjust the blend mode here, and instead of normal, I'm going to come down and choose difference as the blend mode. So now I can see these two layers blending. And again, this doesn't look very nice yet, but trust me, we're going to find a technique here that you're going to be able to use on any photo to make color corrections. Now I need to add an adjustment layer to this layer that I'm working on. And the adjustment layer that I'm going to choose is Threshold. So I'm going to come up and create a new Threshold adjustment layer added to the layer that I'm currently working on here. And with the Properties panel for the Threshold, I'm going to take this slider and I'm just going to keep dragging this backwards, and it looks like it's turning my photo into a black and white image, but I'm just going to keep going here almost to where it turns white, and then just going to back up a bit. I want to find an area, a nice block of area that is black, that I can put a marker to be able to sample my photo to make my color correction. So I have an area here either in the seat of the bike or maybe down in this area down below. And what I'm going to use is here in my tools where I have my eyedropper, I'm going to click and hold there, and I have a color sampler tool that'll put a little marker for me to be able to reference later. So I'm going to use this tool and then come into this blotch of black that I have and click, and it's going to add a marker that I'll be able to reference after I delete the layers that I have just created. So let me just collapse that panel, and then I'm going to shift select these two layers that I just added and throw those away in the trash. But notice I still have the marker there. So now I'm ready to make my correction. With this layer selected, I'm going to go to my adjustments layer, and I'm going to use curves. So I'm going to choose to create a curves adjustment layer. Alright, so a couple of things I want to show you here about curves that will also help you with making color corrections to your photos. And that is using these eyedroppers that we have here. The black, gray, and white. So what we're going to end up doing is using the gray eyedropper and using the eyedropper on this marker. But I want to show you some settings that you may want to consider making permanent changes, because when you use the black or the white or the gray, but mainly in this case the black or the white, when you use that, you're saying to Photoshop, make this area, this pixel, and any pixels that are similar to it throughout the photo black. Well, you have the possibility of losing detail. Same thing if you were to use the white eyedropper. This pixel that I'm clicking on is white. Any other pixels like it throughout, make it white. So you run into the possibility of losing details that are there. So I want to show you how to change it from being totally black and totally white to almost totally black and almost white, and making this change. Now, I make my changes permanent because I use these all the time. So just simply go to the black eyedropper, double click, and you can see here I'm going to use the RGB. So this is set to be completely black. I'm going to come in and just increase that by 10. So RGB, all of these I'm going to change to 10 and click OK. Ask if I want to make it permanent. I'm going to say yes. I'll do the same thing with white. Double click here. This is set to 255, the maximum. I'm going to take that back 10, so I'm going to change this to 245. For RGB, notice here you can see the new color is just shy of being completely white, and that's going to allow us again to preserve details. Click OK, and I'm going to make this change permanent. And now I'm ready to go to the gray eyedropper. Let me click there, and I could leave this at 128, which is a standard, but I'm going to increase it by 5. So I'm going to change these to 133. Notice that it's just a slightly lighter shade of gray, and then I'll click OK and make this permanent. Now that I have the gray eyedropper, I have the area of the photograph that I want to use. And again, I'm using an adjustment layer, so it's not going to make a permanent change here. But I'll take this gray eyedropper and go to the area that I marked, click it, and it's going to make a slight adjustment here to my photo. If you want, let me show you with the black eyedropper. If I click on the black eyedropper and maybe come into this area here under the seat and click inside of there, you can see how it's changing the overall tones of the image. So those are some techniques that you might be able to use for making color corrections. Another technique that I want to show you, let me switch to this photo that I have here of the daisies. Now in this case, this particular picture is the midtones of this image are slightly off. I'd like to kind of increase the greens of the foliage here. My lights and my darks are okay. It's the midtones that I want to adjust. So I'm going to make an adjustment here with the adjustment layers. Let me go ahead and click to add a curves adjustment here. And then I'll go into my bar here, and it's going to click to add an anchor point. And I'm going to drag here in the grays to just increase the greens of the foliage a bit without affecting the whites and the dark colors. All right, so I'm good with that. And let me show you another technique that I've had a lot of fun with. Like here with the flowers, I'd like to be able to see the outlines of the leaves of the flower and maybe give it a little bit of a special type of effect here with some texture and bringing out the details. I'm going to come to the background layer, and I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to call this edges, and I'm going to drag this. I'm actually going to drag it up above my my curves adjustment, and with this layer selected, I'm going to come up in my my filters in the stylize area, and I'm going to choose find edges. Alright, so I can now see the edges of the photo that are coming in, and looks pretty interesting. Let me go ahead and change though the blend mode so it blends down into the layers below. So I'm going to change it from normal, and I could play around with some of these different settings, but for the sake of time I'm just going to go ahead and tell you I'm going to choose linear burn here, and it's now added it to the entire photo, so I can see a lot more detail of edges and things like that. But I don't want this to be quite as dramatic as I'm seeing it right now. So what I'm going to do is, with this layer, I'm actually going to add a mask and then paint in the areas that I want to see these details. So with this layer selected, I'm going to come over to my layers panel, and I can see down at the bottom I can add a mask. Now if I add a mask now, it's going to apply all white to the mask, and I'm not going to see any change. I would have to go in and add black to hide the areas that I don't want to see. But if I hold down my Alt or Option key while I add this mask, instead of adding a white mask, it'll actually add a black mask, hiding everything with black. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a paintbrush now with the mask selected. Let me switch over to my paintbrush, and I'm going to adjust the size here, be a little bit larger, and I'll leave the hardness set to 0 so it's a nice soft brush. And then I'll simply come into the areas where I want to add these details, and I'm just going to paint on top of the leaves here to add a little bit of detail to the edges. Notice I can just go into any of those flowers where I want to add this, and even if it's a little bit dramatic right now, I still have the ability to come in here in just a moment and maybe adjust the opacity of this layer to make the effect not quite as dramatic if I want. So I'm just clicking, and it's almost like using the ability to burn the edges here. So I've added a nice looking effect here to my leaves. Maybe I'll add a little bit more here on my main flower. And you can see that we have now taken, if I go to my history panel and reveal the history, we have taken this photo now from being this where we opened it to now being a little bit more dramatic. Let me click here on the last option that I have with a lot more detail in the leaves. So to review, we've determined the neutral gray for a photo and used that for color correction. Then we made some permanent changes to our curves panel for best results without losing details. We also enhanced the exposure of the midtones using the curves adjustment layer, and then used the find edges filter, a linear burn blend mode, and a mask to bring out the edge details in our photo. Thanks for being with us at Lodestone, and for more detailed instruction, come and visit us at www.lodestone.com.